Welcome to Stuck, Time to Improv. I'm Mary Scott from Business Riff, and I want startup businesses to be wildly successful. Today, we're going to be talking about legal issues for startups, and I'm very happy to have Ray Gerard here from Gerard Law as our special guest. Thanks for coming, Ray.
Well, thank you for having me, Mary. It's a pleasure.
So important to know how to do things right the first time so you don't have to fix them later, right?
Yeah, I've had clients come later, and it's it's never as good as before.
Exactly. So what are some of the first things that startups need to think about from a legal perspective?
One of the first things is your business name. Now, there's two ways of looking at that. Number one, you need to check their registries out there that you can check to see if somebody already has your same business name and whether or not you might be infringing on somebody else's rights. If you find that that's not the case, then you can, for example, take some steps to protect the name so that nobody else can use it as well. So I think the first thing is, check to see whether or not your business name is available.
And another place to look is see if the URL is available. If whatever your name.com is available, chances are it's good for you.
Yes, most people do. Yeah, and if you want to have a website, absolutely, you've got to go on, a host, provider service and see, whether or not the name that you're choosing is in fact going to be susceptible to, the registration of a website, of a domain name. So yes, that's a very good thing to remember.
Okay, and what's the next thing?
Well, the next thing would be your choice of business entity. The simplest form of business entity is, I'm Ray Gerard. I start a business and I do it in my own personal name as Ray Gerard. You can do that. For most people, you're not going to want to do that. You're going to want to establish some type of an entity, whether it's a limited liability company or a corporation. For example, if you're a small business, you probably want to make it an S corporation where you have to file a certain tax selection for that. But you need to choose the business entity. And usually when I'm advising clients, I'll tell them, well, do you have a tax advisor? Do you have a CPA? Do you have somebody as a tax advisor who's familiar with your own, personal financial situations? Because I can advise people on the legal aspects of the various entity choices, but you're going to need to have tax advice as well. So that's probably the next, major consideration you're going to want to think about. You'll need to register and get a tax ID number with the federal government. If you're going to be selling products, you'll have to go to the state and get like a sales tax ID number as well. So tax ID numbers are another preliminary item to have on your checklist because, you'll need to be
Tax ID number is also known as an EIN, right? It's an employer identification number.
Yes, ma'am. EIN or FEIN. Yeah, same. Also, early considerations are, for example, if you have anybody else involved in your business besides just yourself, what kind of agreement are you going to have with your business partners, so to speak? Meaning, even if you have like a limited liability company or corporation, and not technically a partnership, if you've got other people that are involved in your business, you're going to want some type of an agreement to establish what your relative rights and responsibilities are. If that's a limited liability company, there'll be an operating agreement. If it's a corporation, maybe it's a shareholders agreement, a buy-sell agreement.
Nowadays, everybody gets a prenup when they're talking about a personal relationship, and any business relationship needs some kind of agreement too, right?
Exactly. If you're in business with somebody who happens to be married, they get divorced, that can create complications. If you're in business with somebody and they happen to die, now all of a sudden you're dealing with family members, that'll involve complications. Another primary consideration is employees. Do you have any employees? Are you going to give them stock? If so, you want to create some kind of a vesting schedule so they get maybe some stock the first year, second year, third year, so they don't get it all at once. Probably want to have some restrictions on the stock. so that you can redeem the stock, maybe at a favorable price. If they happen to leave the employment in the with the company, you want to, for small business, you want to control who has a say in your company. And there are different ways to do that, but there are a lot of ways to make sure that, you're not dealing with other people who are then going to end up having the ability to, have a vote or, maybe control business decisions down the line. You don't want to be losing control of your company.
And a big consideration is that if you think having a lawyer as a part of your team is expensive, not having one is even more expensive.
Oh, you couldn't say it. I mean, I couldn't say that any better. That is absolutely true. You run into one of these, one of these dilemmas, and now you're going to be spending a lot of money to get out of it. And when you do get out of it, it's never going to be probably, to your complete satisfaction. So you're absolutely right. As a matter of fact, setting a company up properly can usually avoid problems down the line. You're not going to have arguments because people are going to know, well, I can only do this or I can only do that. And so you're going to avoid a lot of arguments that way. If you've got people invested in your company, there are securities laws you have to be mindful of, even for a small business. You're not going to be a publicly traded company, but you have to be sure that you fit into certain exempt categories, that the people investing in your business meet the requirements for an exemption. So there are securities laws you have to keep in mind. If you're going to be sending out emails to people and try to promote your business that way, you've got to there's a federal Can Spam Act that's been around since 2003. That requires that you give people an opportunity to opt out of those emails. So you have to be wary of those kinds of requirements. If you're going to have a website, you're going to want terms of use, all that fine print that nobody ever reads. That's a little button at the bottom of your website page that'll say terms of use, as well as privacy policy. Those are very important to have on a website.
And especially for the people who are developing apps, because what you're doing is collecting data, and you want to make sure that it's very clear that you have the right to collect all that data and how you're going to use it, right?
Absolutely. That's one area where you can get into a bunch of trouble, and you don't want to be there.
Right, particularly in the healthcare fields, because there's HIPAA regulations, and that'll really get you into trouble.
Absolutely. If you have employees, are you going to have an employee policy manual? You should. Are you going to have employee agreements? You should. So there are a lot of considerations there as well to make sure that you're doing things right. And of course, you're going to have to make sure you pay all the employee withholding taxes. You're going to have to, get workers' comp insurance, for example. So there are, I've got a list of.
Yeah. So a lot of times it's very cost effective to outsource a payroll company or some other services that have those bases covered, and then you don't have to worry about it.
And they don't cost much.
No, it costs more to not use them in some ways.
That's right.
Very good. Well, this has been really helpful, and I know we don't have too much time, but is there anything else people need to really think about in terms of setting up the business?
The other thing is vendor contracts, customer contracts. Anytime you do business with somebody, you're going to want to have, contracts. If you have customers, hey, if they don't pay you on time, can you charge interest? Things of that. There's a rash of things to be considered.
You've got to put expectations in writing.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, you certainly do. You certainly do.
So this has been great. Thank you so much, Ray. We'll put contact information for you in the comments. And this is Mary Scott with Business Riff, and I want startups to be wildly successful. So join us again for Stuck, Time to Improv.